This is a message to Democrats, the leadership, Pelosi, Schumer, Joe Biden, and all the former contenders for president. We know you're scared and angry, and we all know why. A crime family has seized control of our country by exploiting a long-standing weakness, a weakness that we can correct, and have to, if we hope to make it through this. In 1963, Martin Luther King showed us exactly how to overcome the plagues of our nation: racism, brutality, extreme poverty, and wars fought by the poor for the rich. Dr. King identified the great stumbling block in the stride toward freedom and those who build dams against social progress with whom he was so gravely disappointed. He called them by their name: white moderates. Now, this is a conversation we don't like to have in public. But as Williamson said on the debate stage, to defeat a big lie, we must be the big truth. To defeat those completely unable to admit fault, we must self-correct and take a fearless inventory. While law enforcement has always been used to terrorize the targets of white supremacists, it's white moderates who passed the largest crime bill in history, who increased drug penalties and cocaine to crack disparities, inflated the numbers of police and prison cells by 100,000, and invented 60 new reasons for the death penalty. It was under President Clinton that war machinery, weapons, and armor spilling over the edges of our overflowing military budgets were recklessly given to police officers who wage a war on drugs with the same tactics and savage cruelty as our recent occupations of foreign countries. White moderates and supremacists, together policing the terrorized for a terrified ruling class. And when so many voices were begging our government loudly and clearly to listen to reason, it was white moderates who voted for the Iraq War in enough numbers to make it a reality, which killed 500,000 innocent people for material conquest. The deals that white moderates have been making with white supremacists have been a Faustian bargain since the very beginning. Deals with the devil. White moderates signed on the dotted line in 1776, when they conceded that freeing African slaves would not be a part of any revolution for freedom. They signed on the dotted line in 1787, when they gave that electoral college and 2 senators each to the southern white kingpins, allowing them to expand their empires of forced labor and human trafficking. And they signed on the dotted line in 1865, when after our brutal civil war over slavery, they just gave the slave patrol a new name, allowing them to drag our black brothers and sisters, mothers and sons, back into jails and back into forced labor. And after 200 years of white moderates consistently finding middle ground with a culture that only values people for their labor, the slave patrol and wage slavers coalesced to give birth to the largest and most grotesque prison industrial complex in the history of humankind. And now, after millions of us have once again taken to the streets, as we've done decade after decade, calling for an end to the madness, what's the white moderate response? To suggest banning chokeholds. In the words of Malcolm X, if you stick a knife 9 inches into my back and pull it out 3 inches, that's not progress. The white moderate is not a balance between 2 extremes. The only center that so-called moderate leadership has ever represented in America is the common interest of a few hundred billionaires that control the richest nation on earth. That is not democracy. We've not yet reached that promised land, so we must continue to advance toward a more perfect union. The Patchwork Constitution of 1776 was an evolutionary step, like how a caterpillar is more sophisticated than a worm. But aristocracy is not democracy, and the caterpillar does not so romanticize its past that it denies its natural right to take flight. And neither should we romanticize the belief system of 18th century feudal lords, like our founding father, James Madison, who was not at all in favor of democracy. The mission for the government that he created was to, quote, protect the minority of the opulent, to protect the rich from the poor. That is a low and uncivilized ideology that should have expired centuries ago, which was also part of their vision. Thomas Jefferson said it like this: no society can make a perpetual constitution or even a perpetual law. The earth belongs always to the living generation, Every constitution, then, and every law naturally expires at the end of 19 years. That's Thomas Jefferson. According to the author of the Declaration of Independence, our Constitution expired in 1808. Even a guy who kept over 600 human beings in forced labor camps, even he believed in progress. The U.S. Constitution as it exists today is not a democratic enough document to allow us admission into the EU. That's how behind the times we are. There's a word Democrats need to embrace: democracy. It comes from Greek, demos kratia, and it means people rule. Before he was assassinated, America's most prominent and important freedom fighter in modern history, Martin Luther King, gave us our next step. He called for the entire weight of the nonviolent movement to bear down on Washington and demand the nation's wealth be invested in us, the nation's people. This isn't just about human rights. This is about fulfilling our human obligation to one another. And of course that means healthcare and education and housing. And Dr. King called for a guaranteed income, or as our founding father Thomas Paine called it, a citizen's dividend, which President Nixon also proposed in 1969 and our House of Representatives passed twice in 1971 before it died in the Senate, where the average net worth of each member is in the millions. None of what Dr. King ever prescribed was radical. Our reaction to it has been radical, and we see the proof right in front of our eyes. We have to accept reality. We live in an extremist society that's coddled and enabled violent white supremacists for centuries. And the modern heirs to that confederacy have made clear their objective is the end of democracy. They worship idols of wealth and power. They use fear and lies to control the people. And that's not just their weakness, it's a suicidal belief system. Now, you've positioned yourselves as our only defense. You control the House and nearly half the Senate. You have the truth and the vast majority of America behind you. And that should make you undefeatable. So we don't want to hear you pointing the finger, blaming Republicans anymore, threatening us with Trump as our punishment if we don't turn out for you this November. What is that? A protection racket. It's unworthy of you. There's nothing threatening about an illiterate country club golfer with dementia who's so unpopular he could never win a fair election. No. The reason you've been so weak for so long isn't Republicans. It's because you're compromised. You remember when you had an impeachment hearing and stood up to tyranny, but only when it slandered Joe Biden's family name? That's why we didn't flood the streets. It wasn't about us. It was about you. As long as your battle remains monarchy versus aristocracy, there's no hope for democracy. In 100 years, organized human life is going to be gone from the earth, suffocated by our own greed and arrogance. This is a message to the aristocracy, white moderates. This isn't revolution. It's evolution, and our survival depends on it. So be worthy of the name Democrat and its purpose, people rule. When the head of a crime family is using the crisis of a lethal pandemic, ripping through the country to plunder our treasury, is blocking a federal response to the virus killing countless people just to weaken the political power of our nation's cities, and is using the tactics, the language, and the instruments of war against us, the American people, you don't keep handing him our money, or our grandparents, or our children's money. Follow his lead and freeze his funds. They aren't his anyway. They're ours. You have the power of the purse, well established in the Constitution. A third of you are lawyers. You can figure it out. The military occupation of Portland, groundwork for overturning elections. We can't wait for November. The time for action is now. We just watched you demonstrate your capacity for coordination and unity when you all dropped out to defeat Bernie Sanders and endorse Joe Biden. And then we watched Bernie turn around and do the same thing. So unify for the immediate arrest and prosecution of any state actor who's murdered a US citizen. And start rolling out the scientific response to the pandemic with the full might of your wealthy donors and corporate donors now. Because that's what money is for. And you don't need permission from white supremacists to do it. Call for national strikes, sit-ins, shutdowns, do whatever is required to reopen all our polling stations, to protect the security of our post office, our mail-in ballots, and the integrity of our voter rolls. The people aren't calling to defund police violence just so we have a few billion in scraps for social services. This is about abolishing a centuries-old culture of evil that doesn't care about human beings. This is about righting our wrongs, which have been allowing it to go on for generations. One of the clearest moral voices in our Congress recently said, "A loving society is an advanced society." And we want to live in an advanced society. The truth is, you have nothing to fear. You don't need to compromise with white supremacists anymore, because white is not our tribe. The roots of democracy stretch all over our earth. One person, one vote wasn't just the rallying cry of John Brown and the white freedom fighters who fought slavery alongside our black brethren. One person, one vote wasn't just the rallying cry of Reverend King, but also Madiba Nelson Mandela and Mahatma Gandhi. And why? Because people rule means human beings are more important than money or power and personal ambition. And this has been the rallying cry of all the movements of the persecuted on every continent, stretching back to the dawn of time. This is the central teaching of Abraham, Buddha, Muhammad, Moses, and our other brown brother from the Middle East called Jesus Christ. The authority of human values over materialism is as natural to all of humankind as the rising of the sun. That is the tribe we belong to and fight for. So you have nothing to fear. Look around. In the face of this deadly plague, moms, dads, children, veterans, with little more than cloth masks have been standing toe-to-toe against combat troops in over 100 American cities, rallying for Black Lives Matter, which means that finally, at long last, the words "we the people" includes black people, and "we" means all the people rule. So no more buildings have to burn, not one more person needs to be gassed, lynched, kidnapped, or killed in the name of false idols, because these are our streets. These are our cities. This is our country, Democrats. You represent us. So all you need to do is one thing. Your job